They say you can tell when the rug's about to be pulled out from under you. A gut feeling. A weird quiet in the office. People avoiding your eyes just a little too obviously. I'd brushed it off at first, chalked it up to stress, budget meetings, the usual whispers that come with any end-of-quarter lull. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened that Thursday morning. I was halfway through explaining our data archive protocols to the guy they'd assigned me to train when the department-wide email hit. Organizational changes? Please read. That subject line landed like a hammer. I clicked it, read it twice, and then a third time, just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. My position, eliminated, effective immediately. HR would be in touch to ensure a smooth transition. I looked up from my screen, and there he was. Nick. The guy I'd been mentoring all week, bright, eager, fresh out of grad school, still holding the notepad I told him to bring. That's when it hit me. I wasn't training support. I was training my replacement. Before we dive in, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Drop a comment below. I read everyone. I arrived early. My name's Daniel Graves. I'm 54 years old. And for the past 21 years, I've done one thing better than just about anyone in my department. Keep the systems running. Quietly. Reliably. I don't brag. I don't take credit. I just make sure the damn thing works. People like me don't make headlines or win plaques. We're the kind who fix the problem before it ever makes it to your inbox. I came from a long line of men who believed in the value of hard work. My dad worked the assembly line until his knees gave out. My grandfather ran a corner gas station until the highway expansion bulldozed it. Me? I found my place behind a screen, solving problems no one saw coming. I've pulled 3 a.m. server restores, slept under my desk during ransomware scares, skipped anniversaries to deploy updates that nobody would ever notice unless they failed. And now, after 2 decades of loyalty, I was tossed aside like yesterday's firmware. No warning, no conversation, just a cold paragraph written by someone who probably wouldn't recognize me in the elevator. The worst part? I didn't even get to feel shocked. Deep down, something in me already knew. The moment Nick was assigned to shadow me, I should have seen it. The way upper management started using phrases like next-gen alignment and agility enhancements. I've been around long enough to know that's just code for cutting costs. Still, I never thought it would come to this. Not like this. So I sat there, stunned, while the kid I'd been showing the ropes to looked at me with wide eyes, unsure if he should even ask his next question. I answered it anyway. Because at that moment I didn't want them to have the satisfaction of seeing me break. But inside, something had shifted. I didn't tell Nick right away. What would be the point? He looked up to me, clearly respected the way I worked, and frankly, he didn't deserve the guilt. He wasn't the one who pulled the trigger. He was just a pawn, probably as clueless as I'd been a week earlier. Still, it felt surreal to keep explaining systems and protocols, knowing full well that by the end of the day, I'd be the one handing over my badge. I excused myself after our 10:30 walkthrough, stepped into the stairwell, and called HR. The voicemail I left wasn't angry, but it was sharp. This is Daniel Graves. I'd like a proper meeting. Face to face. You want to erase 2 decades of work? You're damn well going to look me in the eye when you do it. I hung up without waiting for a callback. When I returned to my desk, Nick was flipping through the documentation I'd printed for him. Hey Dan, sorry if I'm asking too many questions. I just want to make sure I do things right. That one hit me harder than I expected. You're doing fine, kid, I said, forcing a smile. Just take good notes. You'll need them. The rest of the day moved in slow motion. My coworkers must have seen the email, too. Some glanced at me with that awkward sympathy you give someone at a funeral. A few avoided me altogether. Only Mark, One of the senior engineers I'd trained back in 2012 stopped by my desk. He didn't say anything at first, just dropped a black coffee next to my monitor and gave me a nod. That nod meant everything. Around 3 p.m., I finally got the call from HR, Janine Patterson, someone I'd only dealt with during onboarding years ago. She sounded nervous, like she wasn't used to handling terminations outside of Zoom calls and form emails. "Daniel, thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I just want to reiterate that this decision wasn't performance-based. It's part of a broader organizational strategy." "Save it," I cut in. "Just tell me when to clean out my desk." There was a pause. "Tomorrow morning, we can have someone meet you at 9. I hung up before she could finish her sentence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my garage, the same one I'd converted into a small workshop after my youngest moved out, and stared at the old framed photo of the tech team from back in 2005. My hair was darker, my gut smaller, but my smile was the same. I remembered those years, how we pulled miracles out of duct-taped servers and spaghetti code because we believed in what we were building. And now they were replacing people like me with cheaper, younger versions who wouldn't question the new direction. But here's the thing. When you've built something from the ground up, you don't walk away empty-handed. You walk away knowing exactly where the cracks are buried. Friday morning came with a gray, washed-out sky. Fitting, really. I showed up at 8:45, 15 minutes early. Old habits die hard. Nobody greeted me at the door, and the receptionist didn't even make eye contact as I signed in for what would be my last day. A security guard, younger than my son and twice as stiff, handed me a visitor's badge without a word. He didn't realize it, but that simple gesture, downgrading me from employee to outsider, hit me like a gut punch. My desk looked just like I'd left it the day before. Coffee mug still half full, a sticky note reminding me to update the backup logs, and the stapler I'd brought from home sitting crooked beside my keyboard. I opened my bottom drawer and started packing. Some folks offered quiet goodbyes. A few tried to crack jokes to lighten the air, but mostly people kept their heads down, pretending they weren't watching a man get erased in real time. Nick stopped by as I was pulling the last of my personal files off the server. "Dan, I just heard. I had no idea. I'm really sorry." I looked at him. The poor guy was pale, uncomfortable, but there was sincerity in his voice. "Not your fault," I said. "You're not the one signing off on cuts." He nodded, clearly unsure of what else to say. "Can I buy you lunch or something?" It's the least I could do. I appreciated the offer, but I was in no mood for sandwiches and awkward silences. "Maybe another time," I said, then handed him a flash drive. "This has everything you'll need: scripts, legacy system diagrams, log rotation schedules. Keep it clean, don't cut corners, and don't let anyone convince you patch jobs are good enough. That's how things fall apart." He took it like I was handing him a family heirloom. And in a way, I was. At 9:05, Carl Jennings finally showed up. My boss. The man who'd sat 3 offices down from me for 6 months without learning how to pronounce my last name. He entered the floor like a man checking boxes, clipboard in hand, HR manager trailing behind him. "Daniel," he said, with the forced warmth of a politician kissing babies, "thanks for your years of service. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." I didn't shake his hand. I just looked him square in the eye. "You know you didn't need to do it like this." He blinked, caught off guard. "It's not personal. These decisions are made at a higher level." I chuckled, couldn't help it. "Right. Higher level. Like I haven't watched this company from the inside for 2 decades. Just remember something, Carl. You don't throw out the foundation and expect the roof to stay standing." He shifted, clearly uncomfortable, but didn't say a word. By 9:20, I was gone. But not finished. Not even close. I spent the weekend in silence. No calls, no TV, just the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the floorboards. My wife, Anne, tried to keep things light, God bless her, but I knew she was worried. She offered to go over our finances with me, asked if I wanted to take a short trip, clear my head. I told her I'd figure it out. What I didn't tell her was that my head was already clearer than it had been in years. I wasn't angry. Not in the way people expect. I wasn't plotting revenge with clenched fists or shouting into a pillow. What I felt was colder, cleaner. I'd been loyal, consistent, quiet. But I hadn't been blind. I'd seen the early signs over the past year, corner cutting in the infrastructure budget, vendor invoices that didn't add up, rushed updates that bypassed review. They thought the old guy in the IT corner wasn't paying attention. But I was. I always was. What Carl didn't know, what no one knew, is that I'd been keeping backups. Real ones. Local ones. For years. Not because I planned anything like this, but because I believed in protecting the work. Ours was a custom-built system, patched and modified over 2 decades. Newer managers thought they could replace it with some off-the-shelf solution and a couple fresh MBAs. But they didn't understand how it actually worked. What depended on what? Which configurations were hand-coded? Which schedules needed manual intervention? That knowledge was in my head. And in the archive I'd quietly mirrored to a secure NAS in my garage. Late Sunday night, I sat down at my workbench and opened the encrypted drive. There it all was. Documentation, change logs, network topology maps, even a few flagged emails I'd saved after one too many questionable decisions came from upstairs. Nothing illegal, not yet. But enough to raise eyebrows in the right circles. I never considered myself the whistleblower type, but they'd given me no choice. By Monday morning, I'd written a clean, concise summary of the infrastructure vulnerabilities I knew were being overlooked. It wasn't sabotage. I'd never do that. It was a warning. A professional courtesy. I sent it anonymously to the internal audit committee's inbox, and then I emailed a copy to myself, for safekeeping. That same afternoon, I got a call from Mark, the engineer who'd brought me coffee that day. "Dan," he said, keeping his voice low, "something's going on." Jenkins just sent out a company-wide memo about unauthorized system configurations. He's spooked. They're talking about legacy risks and compliance exposure. Did you do something? I paused before answering. "Nope," I said. "But I might have reminded them how much they forgot." Mark was quiet for a moment. "You know, I think they thought you'd just walk away." "So did I replied. Turns out they underestimated the guy who built the walls they're still standing in. Wednesday morning, Anne handed me the phone while I was in the garage sanding down an old shelf I'd been meaning to fix for months. "Some guy named Turner from your old job," she said, eyebrows raised. Sounded tense. I wiped my hands and took the call. Turner was the company's chief risk officer. We'd crossed paths maybe twice in 20 years, and both times were during cybersecurity audits. He was a cautious man, one of the few execs I'd ever seen actually read a technical report instead of forwarding it to someone else. That he was calling me now meant one thing. The fire had gotten too big to smother. "Daniel," he said, his voice tight, "I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I saw the materials that came through audit yesterday." I said nothing. "Look, I'll get straight to it. There are systems no one here knows how to manage now. Jenkins is panicking. We've got vendors calling about failed backup verifications and 2 clients reporting latency issues in the analytics dashboard. You know that framework better than anyone. Hell, you are the framework. We need to talk." I let that hang for a beat. "You let them replace the brain with a blueprint, Turner. How's that working out?" He sighed. "Carl made a bad call. We're dealing with it, but I'd like to meet. Today, if possible." That afternoon, I walked into the office I'd been escorted out of less than a week earlier. This time, no badge, no security guard. Just me and a briefcase holding the only thing that could help them. Understanding. Turner met me in a small conference room with two other suits I didn't recognize. One introduced himself as legal counsel. The other was the new interim CIO, which told me Carl was already on the chopping block, or at least hanging by a thread. "We understand you've retained proprietary knowledge about our legacy infrastructure," the attorney began. "No," I corrected. "What I have is documentation I created while doing the job you paid me to do. Nothing proprietary about it. It was never classified, never marked confidential, and most of it was ignored." Turner cleared his throat. "We're willing to offer you a consulting agreement, short-term, generous pay. We just need to stabilize things before quarter end." I leaned back. "This isn't about the money. It's about respect and accountability. You think tossing me a check gets you out clean?" They all went quiet. I continued. "I'll help, but not quietly. I want a public correction, an internal announcement clarifying that my departure was not due to performance. I want the record straight, not just for me, but for every old-timer you shoved aside thinking he was obsolete." The attorney started to speak, but Turner held up a hand. "Let's make that happen." They thought they were buying my silence. Instead, they were negotiating with the guy who'd already made himself impossible to erase. By the end of the week, my name was back in the company directory, this time with a new title, Legacy Systems Consultant. It wasn't flashy, but it came with a hefty hourly rate and a short-term contract that gave me control over how and when I worked. More importantly, it included an official internal memo circulated by Turner's office, stating that my termination had been reassessed and was found to have been based on incomplete information. The phrase was corporate speak, but it said what needed saying. They'd screwed up. I didn't go back to my old desk. I worked remotely from my garage, surrounded by the quiet familiarity of the tools and machines I actually respected. I logged into the systems once again, guided Nick through configurations over video calls, and patched the vulnerabilities that had nearly brought their reporting architecture to its knees. Funny thing, Nick was the only one who treated me like I'd never left. He listened more now, took fewer shortcuts. Maybe he'd learned something more valuable than system architecture. A week into the contract, Carl was gone. Word started trickling out in group chats and internal Slack channels. "Stepped down," was the official line, but I knew better. You don't resign voluntarily 2 days after a whistleblower document lands in audit. And though I'd never formally filed one, the paper trail I'd sent was enough to rattle the executive floor. I got a call from HR offering me a full-time role again, but I declined. I wasn't interested in returning to a desk under fluorescent lights, or becoming the safety net they ignored until they needed it. Instead, I offered to train the next generation properly. Build a program, a real one, not some checklist slapped together by managers who'd never touched code. To my surprise, they agreed. I spent 2 weeks designing the framework. Mentoring cycles, real-time system simulations, crisis response drills, the works. It was the kind of thing I'd always wanted to do, but was never given the time or authority to lead. Now, they were desperate enough to let me build it right. On my last official day, Turner set up a brief Zoom with a dozen team leads. He thanked me for my service, credited me with stabilizing operations, and invited me to say a few words. I kept it short. I gave a lot to this company, and for a while I thought that effort had been thrown away. But what matters now is what you build moving forward. Don't forget the people who keep things standing just because they don't ask for attention. Remember them, because one day you'll wish they were still around. Then I logged off, just like that. No parade, no plaque, just a man walking away knowing he'd done things on his own terms. A week passed. Then 2. My contract was officially closed out, the final payment wired into my account with a line item labeled Consulting Services, Critical Systems Recovery. Cold, clinical, but the number next to it made up for the lack of sentiment. I wasn't used to being paid what I was worth. It felt good. Strange, but good. I spent my mornings walking the trail behind our neighborhood, a habit I'd dropped years ago when work swallowed everything else. Anne joined me when she could, and we talked like we used to, about our kids, the garden, the old dreams we'd shelved for later. Turns out later had finally arrived. Then one afternoon, I got an email from someone I hadn't heard from in over a decade, Mason Greer. He'd been one of our earliest project managers, long gone after a corporate shakeup. The subject line simply read, "Heard what happened." I clicked it open. "Dan, I saw the memo they released. Looks like you gave them a well-deserved scare. I've been consulting for 3 mid-size firms out east that could use someone who actually knows how to hold the seams together before things rip apart. Interested in talking?" Mason. I stared at the message for a long minute. Then I smiled. The story had started to ripple out. People were talking. Folks who'd spent years in the trenches like me were hearing about what happened. How a so-called obsolete employee had saved an entire company from its own negligence. It wasn't just about tech anymore. It was about value, integrity, proof that experience still mattered. Later that evening, Mark sent me a text. "You really shook things up. They're rewriting internal policy, talking about creating a legacy systems protection plan. I think they're scared to lose another Dan." I laughed aloud reading that, not because I was proud of their fear, but because they'd finally realized what so many companies forget. When you replace people like their parts, you risk losing more than labor. You lose wisdom, stability, the human glue that holds chaos together. That weekend, I sat on the back porch, a glass of bourbon in hand, watching the sun set behind our neighbor's oak trees. Anne came out, dropped into the chair beside me, and asked the question she'd held back for days. "Do you regret it? Not fighting harder to stay?" I thought for a while before answering. Number staying would have meant pretending it hadn't happened, that it didn't matter. But it did. And the way I left, that mattered too. She nodded. "You've still got more to do, don't you?" I looked out at the horizon, warm light fading over the rooftops. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think I do." Because even though I'd walked away from that building, I hadn't walked away from what I knew. And now, for the first time in years, I got to choose where my knowledge went next. The call with Mason was scheduled for Monday at noon. I wore jeans, a flannel shirt, and sipped coffee out of the mug my daughter had given me for Father's Day 3 years back. 1. Fix it, Dad. It was the first meeting in my career where I didn't feel like I had something to prove. Mason greeted me like an old friend. No small talk, no fluff. "Dan," he said, "I've got 3 companies in various stages of what I'd call pre-disaster. They're cutting corners, buying shiny solutions they don't understand, and ignoring the people waving the red flags. In short, they're about 6 months from where your old shop ended up, only they won't have a Dan Graves when the bottom falls out." I chuckled. "Sounds like a flattering sales pitch, Mason." "It's not a pitch. It's a chance to do what you do best. Step in, fix the mess, train the people smart enough to listen, and walk away before the politics start again." That last part? That hit home. I'd spent over 2 decades surviving the slow drip of bureaucracy, budgets slashed by suits who couldn't reboot a router, and performance reviews filled with buzzwords that never measured what I actually did. Now, Mason was offering me something different. Purpose without pretense. Influence without being shackled to a desk and stripped of respect. By the end of the call, I'd agreed to a trial consult for a firm in Pittsburgh that was hemorrhaging client data due to a badly structured migration plan. They didn't know how much trouble they were in. Yet. But I'd seen this movie before, and I knew how it ended if someone didn't step in. Anne was thrilled. "You're not done, just redirected," she said, tapping the side of her wine glass that night at dinner. "And you look 10 years younger now that you're not dragging that old place on your back." She wasn't wrong. I felt lighter, like my voice mattered again. As I packed for the trip, I glanced at the dusty briefcase I used to carry to work every day. I didn't need it anymore. My tools now lived in a secure cloud, a solid-state drive, and the lessons burned into me after 2 decades of quiet resilience. I threw in a worn notebook, the same one I used back in 2001 when I built my first full-stack system from scratch. The pages were yellowing, the corners curled, but the diagrams still made sense. Before I left, I sent one last message to Nick, the kid who unknowingly stepped into my role. "Take care of the foundation. Don't let anyone sell you shortcuts, and when the time comes, speak up, even if it's uncomfortable." "Especially then," he replied 2 minutes later. "You taught me more than anyone. I won't forget it." Neither would I, because my time at that company wasn't wasted. It was the start of something bigger than I ever imagined. Pittsburgh was cold, damp, and exactly what I needed. The company Mason sent me to, Canyon Ridge Analytics, was housed in a slick glass building with a lobby full of overpriced art and a rotating list of buzzword-laden job titles. But behind the gloss, it was the same story I'd seen before. Junior tech staff spread too thin, legacy databases clinging to life, and execs more interested in marketing dashboards than data integrity. My first meeting was with the CTO, a guy named Jeremy who looked like he'd been promoted for charisma, not competence. He welcomed me with one of those firm, overcompensating handshakes and said, "We just need you to plug some holes until our AI solution is up and running." I raised an eyebrow. "AI's only as smart as the data you feed it. Right now, your data's about as trustworthy as a politician in an election year." He blinked. Didn't like that much. But he backed off when I rattled off 6 vulnerabilities I'd spotted before I even sat down. Over the next few days, I worked alongside their engineering team. Kids mostly, sharp but green. Reminded me of younger versions of myself, eager, caffeinated, and not yet jaded. They asked questions, watched how I approached root cause analysis, took notes when I taught them how to map infrastructure dependencies the old-fashioned way, on paper with colored pens and clear logic. And they listened, really listened. By the end of the week, the system was no longer bleeding out. We caught a breach in waiting, corrected 5 years of misconfigured permissions, and put together a roadmap for migrating to a cloud environment without triggering a compliance nightmare. I didn't do it alone, I guided them, but made sure they saw themselves as the heroes. Because that's how you build sustainability. On my last day, one of the engineers, a kid named Malik, handed me a coffee and said, "I hope I'm like you in 20 years. I laughed. "Kid, aim higher. Just remember to value the boring stuff. It's what keeps the fancy stuff from falling apart." I flew home feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Useful, not tolerated, not dismissed. Useful. At home, Anne had cleaned out the guest room. "Figured you'd need a real office now," she said with a grin. She'd set up a desk, a new printer, and a bookshelf filled with every notebook I'd ever scribbled in. On the wall, she'd framed an old drawing our daughter made when she was 10. Me in a cape, labeled Daddy, the computer superhero. That night, as I sat down to plan my next consult, one Mason had already lined up, I realized something important. I'd been forced out so they could move forward. But somehow I was the one building something new. 6 months later, I found myself speaking at a regional tech conference in Indianapolis. The panel was called "Legacy Doesn't Mean Obsolete," and I'd been invited as a keynote. Me. A guy who used to fix corrupted backups at 2 a.m., while middle managers slept soundly and bragged about agile pivots on Monday mornings. Funny how quickly the world turns when someone finally listens. The room was packed. Half were seasoned IT veterans like me. Half were younger professionals trying to make sense of a fast-changing industry. I talked about the dangers of forgetting the foundation, how too many companies chase speed and optics, burning through experience like it's an outdated plugin. I told them about documentation, mentorship, accountability. I didn't name the company that fired me, but I didn't need to. The lesson was clear. Afterward, a woman from a cybersecurity startup pulled me aside. "You made me think about the people we're ignoring," she said. "We've lost 3 senior engineers this year, and now I realize we never gave them a reason to stay." I smiled. Give them purpose, respect, and the room to teach. That's all most of us ever wanted. Back home, life had settled into a rhythm I hadn't known I'd missed. Mornings with Anne, weekend barbecues with the kids when they visited, and consulting gigs that came on my terms. I worked less, but made more. Not just in money, though that was nice, but in meaning. The kind of value that didn't come from titles or office space, but from knowing you left something better than you found it. Then, one quiet afternoon, I got a letter. An actual letter, on company letterhead, mailed to my house. I recognized the logo immediately. Inside was a short, typed note from the new COO. "Daniel, I wasn't with the company when you left, but I've read your file and reviewed the incident. What happened wasn't just mishandled, it was disrespectful. Please accept our apology, though I know it's late. We've implemented the mentorship program you designed and named it after you, the Graves Initiative. Thank you for reminding us what real leadership looks like. C. Blake, Chief Operating Officer." I stared at the words for a long time, then set the letter down on my workbench next to my old notebook. The same one I'd carried through 2 decades of chaos and quiet victories. Anne found me out there an hour later, sipping coffee and staring into space. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. Better than okay. Because in the end, I hadn't needed revenge. I hadn't needed a takedown or public spectacle. All I needed was for the truth to outlive the lie. And now it had. The kid they fired was gone. But the man who stayed standing, he built something no one could erase.